CBSI Connect system is one of our main regional projects under the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, which started in 2010 and was a recognition by the CARICOM states, the Dominican Republic and the United States, that we needed a joint approach to some of the security issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. So CBSI Connect was a way to promote law enforcement information sharing across the Caribbean region.
CBSI Connect allows each institution to act independently with its own independent portal site, but also replicate credentials to a shared site where collaboration and learning can take place among all participating institutions.
Through the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, we've started several regional programs, whether that's justice sector training on ballistics investigations, or law enforcement investigations training. And through CBSI Connect, these trainings can be broadcast to all member states.
Academies, agencies have been using it. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants for courses.
The knowledge that has been gained in the field, the knowledge that has been gained in the region can be shared, and that sharing and that collaboration is what makes this a very special asset moving forward for Caribbean law enforcement.
CBSI Connect users can either view our trainings at the academies themselves that are installed conference centers, or they can even use it at their on their laptops at home. And I believe we now also have mobile capability, so it is truly a training system that's accessible anywhere.
We have regular meetings with heads of academies. We meet regularly with agencies in the region. We get their input into courses and programs that are being offered on CBSI Connect.
Trafficking in people, trafficking in drugs, trafficking in money transcends the participating institutions in the region and truly becomes regional problems. The sharing of information, shedding sunlight, sharing expertise is a very important tool in combating these issues.
We've seen several positive impacts from the availability of training on CBSI Connect. One of them, of course, is a travel cost savings, because you no longer have to spend a day traveling and buy an expensive flight to go receive a training at another academy.
The training that has been done on CBSI Connect for law enforcement officers has had tremendous response. We have had an increase in enrollment of participants on CBSI Connect. We have had academies putting more courses on CBSI Connect. We have had training every month on CBSI Connect.
We encourage the use of the system for both internal training and external training. And we are trying to build out the library of available courses stored on the system. And we encourage our member states to upload their individual training, which they want to share with the community.
If there are courses that are available that pique your interest, that could enhance your job, your ability to perform your duties as a professional over CBSI Connect, seek them out, participate, engage. This is really the value of what this technology brings to the region.
And that has allowed different academies to build much stronger ties with each other and cooperate on shared law enforcement challenges in the region.
Ms. Deborah Estrada, Director, Immigration Belize. ASP Leroy Joseph, Chair of CICC and Head of Immigration Grenada. Major Roy Samuels, Head of Immigration Suriname. Ms. Charmaine Gandhi Andrews, Chief Immigration Officer, Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Garfield Wong, Deputy Director, Customs and Border Control Service, Cayman Islands. Ms. Rana Kasafi, Head, Caribbean Protection Unit, UNHCR. Dr. Clarence Henry, Program Officer, OECS. Mr. Rufus Ferdinand, Deputy Chief Operating Officer, CARICOM IMPACS Joint Regional Communications Center. Ms. Tanya Ayao, Acting Director, CARICOM IMPACS. Ms. Joycing Hughes, Border Security Specialist, CARICOM IMPACS. Ms. Nadine Burchell, Program Officer, CARICOM IMPACS. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am Suzanne Sipasad, the Regional Training Advisor for CBSI Connect. CBSI Connect is the premier virtual learning platform in the Caribbean, which is responsible for ensuring that all law enforcement officers in the region are kept in frequent contact through training workshops and sessions. As a regional training advisor, I have witnessed the exponential growth of all users of the CBSI Connect. These include police, border security officers, and personnel involved in the criminal justice sector. There has been a remarkable increase in the number and types of programs that are offered on the platform, which range from techniques to prevent and detect criminal activity to the holistic well-being of our law enforcement officers. With the global impact of COVID-19, there has been a greater reliance on technology. The good news is that CBSI Connect platform works. It is reliable, effective, and efficient. I am therefore happy that the transition has begun to hand over the platform to CARICOM IMPACS, an agency that is well respected within the region. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Nadine Bushell, who will be bringing remarks on behalf of the Executive Director, Acting Executive Director, Michael Jones from CARICOM IMPACS.
Good afternoon to our esteemed panelists and our viewers on our website and on YouTube and Facebook. According to Dr. Parag Khanna, founder and managing partner of FutureMap, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on public health, the global economy, and social behavior may augur deeper shifts in our human geography, our distribution around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic will challenge the way we think of mobility and migration. What are the implications for migration and human mobility policy? To moderate this session this afternoon, where we discuss this topic, are two of my colleagues, Mrs. Joycelyn Hughes and Mr. Rufus Ferdinand. Ms. Joycelyn Hughes was assigned by the government of Antigua and Barbuda to CARICOM IMPACS as the Border Security Specialist since January 2016. She has been in the Department of Immigration of Antigua and Barbuda since 2001 to present, and she rose to the position of the Deputy Chief Immigration Officer. Joycelyn also worked for 2.5 years during Cricket World Cup at the Joint Regional Communication Center, better known as the JRCC. Our second moderator is from the JRCC. He is Rufus Ferdinand, who is the Deputy Chief Operations Officer with responsibility for two critical systems, the Advanced Passenger and Advanced Cargo Information Systems. It is now my pleasure to hand you over to my two colleagues, Joycelyn and Rufus, to what promises to be a very enjoyable session. Joycelyn, Rufus.
Rufus, you need to unmute your mic.
And thank you, Ms. Bushell. It gives me a great pleasure to be part of CARICOM IMPACT's first ever virtual security conference and to be moderating this session, Migration and Mobility in a Time of Crisis. Also to assist with moderating this session is Ms. Joycelyn Hughes. Colleagues, panelists, and those who have joined us on Facebook and YouTube. CARICOM has historically experienced large-scale incoming and outgoing migration. Prior to COVID-19, it was subject to fluid internal as well as external movements of persons that migrated because of various reasons, economic situations, government stability, and living conditions. With the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries have not only intensified lockdown operations, but have also put in place preventive, analytical, and therapeutic medical interventions. The measures taken include public actions such as restrictions on individual independence through quarantine, lockdown of travel restrictions and bans, the use of ICT technologies in contact tracing, and the utilization of technologies to facilitate the provision of and assessing of services and teleworking. As we have seen through this crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic has placed regions in complex situations, for example, seeking ways to deal with population displacement and finding ways to deal with the severe and long drawn out crisis situation and the ongoing impact of major humanitarian emergencies. Since the COVID-19 is a global health challenge, it has raised in several quarters fundamental and difficult questions about migration, human rights, social justice, codes of ethics, and social implications of the measures taken or the lack of such measures to respond to the pandemic in different countries. The current public health crisis caused by the COVID-19 disproportionately affects communities and individuals who are already in vulnerable and marginalized situations. Around the world, migrants may be particularly vulnerable to humiliation and discrimination and may be excluded from access to rights by laws, including in the context of public health and recovery response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everyone, including all migrants, regardless of their migration status, must be taken into account as an integral part of any effective public health and recovery response to the COVID-19. Including migrants in the response to this crisis is the only effective way to not only protect the rights of migrants, but also to avoid fostering chauvinism and endangering the health of the society as a whole. As a region, we have a responsibility to take specific measures and work with our regional and international partners to support migrants and the movement of persons in situations of vulnerabilities. During this session, several issues will be discussed: the issue of mobility and migration in times of pandemics, control and uncontrolled movements, mobility of cases, patient mobility, border controls, migration, mobility during the COVID-19 pandemic in CARICOM, rights of movements and restrictions of liberties, border surveillance, access to health facilities, goods and services. This session will be an interactive session. Our panelists, a team of border security experts and practitioners who will be invited to give brief remarks on migration and mobility issues specific to their respective countries and areas of responsibilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, I will invite Ms. Joycelyn Hughes to introduce our panelists and to guide them through their intervention. Ms. Joycelyn.
Thank you, Rufus. Good afternoon to our distinguished panelists, who are regional leaders of border security and also one leader of an international agency. Each panel will have 3 minutes to present, following which the session will be open for questions and comments from participants. Our first panelist is Assistant Superintendent of Police Leroy Joseph, who is chair of CARICOM, the CARICOM Standing Committee of Chiefs of Immigration, and the head of Immigration in Grenada. ASP Joseph is attached to the Grenada Immigration Department for the last 34 years and head of immigration since 2018. He is a certified trainer in organized crime and the free movement of CARICOM nationals. He attended police academies in China, America, Barbados, and Jamaica, a well-rounded leader in the region on immigration matters. As chair of the Standing Committee of Chiefs of Immigration and Comptrollers of Customs, we will now invite ASP Joseph to make brief remarks on the impact of regional border closures on containing the COVID-19 infection. ASP Joseph.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joycelyn Hughes. I'm going to go to my esteemed panelists and CARICOM IMPACS for hosting this conference. Today, I will just talk about the impact of regional border closure and containing the COVID-19 infection. I have to condense it because it could be an elaborate topic. The border closure was a step taken in the region, in the regional direction of government. The virus was first recognized in Yunnan province, China, in December 2019, and in short order, with limited preparation, impacted our regional borders. The closure of regional borders was a critical mitigating factor through control mechanism, which aided significantly in reducing the amount of imported cases and flattening the curve of this dreaded virus within our region. It was projected by scientists that 80% of the region population will contract the virus, with 10% severity cases and 3% death. However, This figure did not become a reality due to stringent measures taken. Notwithstanding the fact that the curve has been flattened and lives have been saved, the regional economy headed for contractions, primarily in the area of tourism. Both air and sea ports impacted significantly. In the aspect of impacting the regional security, I must comment CARICOM impacts, the fourth pillar of CARICOM, and in particular, one of the main sub-agency, the GRCC, for sharing vital information during the midpoint of the pandemic. Lieutenant Colonel Jones, Executive Director of CARICOM Impacts, Rufus Ferdinand, Operation Manager, GRCC, and Joyce Hughes, Border Specialist, for the pivotal role in keeping our borders safe through information sharing and training in the area of PPE, personal protection equipment, the RSS in providing emergency air services. In closing, let me be reminded that the impact of regional border closure on containing the COVID-19 infection rests fundamentally on the methodology employed in the conduct of our operation at our various borders. Consider the fact that COVID-19 created a pandemic, a paradigm shift at the air and sea ports. As border officials, we must be assertive and vigilant at all times. Again, I take this opportunity to thank CARICOM Impacts for giving this opportunity to share at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, ASP Joseph, for those brief remarks. And we'll move right along because we have a wide panel. I'll call on now Ms. Charmaine Gandhi Andrews, Chief Immigration Officer, Trinidad and Tobago. Ms. Gandhi Andrews is the Chief Immigration Officer in the Immigration Division, Ministry of National Security, a position she has held for the past 5 years. A career immigration officer, she has served within the Immigration Division for 31 years. Prior to becoming chief, she was the first director of the Counter-Trafficking Unit and was recognized by the United States of America State Department as a hero acting to end modern-day slavery. She has received extensive training in migration management, human trafficking, and refugee law, but experience and observation of change in migration trends has been her greatest teacher. Ms. Andrews will now speak on the issue of migration challenges during the national border closures and measures employed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago to deal with this issue. Ms. Gandhi Andrews.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. Trinidad and Tobago, like countries the world over, took drastic measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus and to protect those persons within the borders. On March 18th, the borders were closed to all foreign nationals, and on March 23rd, the borders were closed to all persons, including citizens and residents, who now had to shelter in place in a foreign country. Foreign nationals who were in Trinidad and Tobago as visitors had no means to return to their place of abode, and government granted extensions of stay so that those persons could maintain legal status until their departure. Only cargo vessels were allowed to enter and leave, but the crew could not disembark. And persons wanting to enter or leave the country had to obtain an exemption from the Minister of National Security. A lockdown of the entire country began on March 30th, and within 2 months, we were able to flatten the curve. The country reopened on a phased basis, and life returned to a new normal with new habits. The government began a managed return of citizens and residents with mandatory state quarantine for 14 days. Illegal entry slowed during the period of the lockdown as movement within the country was restricted and enforced by the police, and the closure of businesses meant that there were no employment available. However, with the relaxing of the lockdown and the reopening of the businesses, there has been a marked increase in human smuggling between Trinidad and Venezuela. The borders are still closed, Yet non-nationals have been trying to enter the country, and some have been able to escape the increased maritime controls implemented by the Coast Guard and the land patrols by the police and the Defense Force. As an island with porous borders, illegal entry can only happen by sea. Trinidad sits 7 miles from the closest point in Venezuela, and a boat can reach our shores within minutes. We have noticed on social media the advertising of boat trips between Trinidad and Venezuela with a package deal of a taxi to take them to their accommodation. This speaks an organized network of smugglers and facilitation by persons in Trinidad and Tobago, and no doubt a flagrant disregard or ignorance of the laws of this country. Our laws prohibit illegal entry, and it is an offense under the Immigration Act. So too is inducing, aiding, and abetting, or attempting to induce, aid, or abet any person to violate a provision of the law. Illegal entry is one of the biggest threats to any measures implemented to control the spread of COVID-19. And within the last 2 weeks, there's been a sudden spike in the cases of coronavirus requiring epidemiological investigation. Coincidentally, that is happening with increasing illegal entry from Venezuela, leading to widespread speculation by the public that illegal migrants have brought the virus with them. One needs only to read the comments on social media to understand the public concern. With news reports of the virus spreading rapidly within Latin America, there's a high probability that illegal immigrants may come into the country undetected with the virus. Trinidad and Tobago, like all small island developing states, has limited resources, and the spread of the virus can easily overwhelm the healthcare system, and a second shutdown of the country can damage the economy to the detriment of all persons who call Trinidad and Tobago home. I look forward to the discussion on the illegal migration, and I hand over to you, Joycelyn.
Thank you, Charmaine, for those remarks also. And moving right along, I'll now call on Major Roy Samuels, Head of Immigration Suriname. Major Samuels is the National Coordinator, Immigration and Border Security in the Directorate of National Security since 2019. He has also served as a Commander, Investigation Unit, Military Police in 2010, and Commander Immigration, Military Police in 2011. Also Deputy Commander, Military Police in 2015. He has a wealth of knowledge on migration and mobility in Suriname. Major Samuels will speak to the issue of irregular migration specific to land borders between Suriname and other South American countries during the national border closure and how the issue of irregular migration was mitigated. Major Samuels.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. I have a presentation ready for you. And it will be with the title, Migration and Mobility in a Time of Crisis. Where is it? Can you see it? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Major Samuel, but we're not seeing your presentation.
Okay, let's take a look. Can you see it? Can you see it now?
No, not as yet.
Not yet?
No.
I have to share it. Let's take a look.
Activation field.
Sure.
Ito na kan kaya. Ni. Slide. Ito na kan kaya. Super.
Right. Yeah.
What is it? What is it? Represent us.
Let's take a look.
One sec. That is my email. What is this slideshow?
Are you clicking on the share screen link?
Yes.
Yes.
Share screen. Okay. What is it here? They said screen share. What it's show me screen sharing has failed to start. The window you selected is invalid.
Okay, what I'll do, I'll go on to Deborah in Belize, and then I'll let the IT person speak to you and try to sort that out. Is that okay? Thank you. Our fourth speaker for this afternoon is Ms. Deborah Baptiste Estrada, Director of Immigration, Belize. Deborah has started her career in an entry-level officer within the Immigration Department in 1989, leaving her with 31 years of dedicated service to the government and people of Belize. She took the reins of Director of Immigration in 2020 and became the first female director to have risen through the ranks. During her years as an immigration officer, she served at all levels and at all major land borders and the Philip Goldstone International Airport. Ms. Estrada had an incorruptible style to the job, enforcing immigration laws, and has quietly effected change and strengthened the rule of law. In 2016, Ms. Estrada was honored among 14 women around the world at the annual United States of America Secretary of State's International Women of Courage Awards. The award was delivered by the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, to women who have demonstrated courage and leadership in advocating for human rights, gender equality, women's equality, and social progress. Ms. Estrada will speak to the issue of irregular migration specific to land borders between Belize and Central America during the national border closure and how the issue of irregular migration was mitigated. Deborah?
Greetings to one and all, particularly to the representatives from the CARICOM IMPACS, who in fact invited me to partake in this very important forum. Although geographically located in Central America, Belize, like our CARICOM sister nations of Suriname and Guyana, we share thousands of miles of unsecured land borders with neighboring countries in Central America. Guatemala to the west and south of Belize, and Mexico to the north, and gracefully blessed by the Caribbean Sea to our east. Under normal circumstances, bordering communities see the mobility of nationals, non-national, and extra-regionals who traverse these ports of entry-exit for the purpose of visiting relatives and friends, trading goods and services, tourism and business, medical travel, education, and the like. These borders activities have come to a screeching halt as a result of this phenomena of COVID-19 pandemic. Something of unprecedented proportion, and one that I believe the entire global community never thought that we would have seen or experienced in our lifetime. Like most Central American and Caribbean countries, this pandemic resulted in a total shutdown of our land, sea, and airports, with provisions made only for entry and exit of cargo and for those persons who seek life-saving medical attention. Belize, like many other countries, enacted by way of our National Oversight Committee, headed by our Honorable Prime Minister D. Barrow and the Leader of the Opposition, travel bans, closure of businesses, closure of schools, curfew, and declaration of a state of emergency, all in an effort and with the sole aim of preventing the community spreading of this dreaded pandemic. During the national lockdown and to date, our security forces are in full deployment across land borders, as well as our Coast Guard, with the mandate of increased vigilance to mitigate any potential threats from transnational criminal activity, which includes smuggling and human trafficking. Some other measures taken to mitigate the risk associated with irregular migration includes the increase of interagency checkpoints and roving patrols across the country, increased penalties for immigration offenses, imposition of a mandatory sentence for immigration violators, establishment of hotlines by the Ministry of National Security, encouraging citizens to report incidences of immigration violators and contrabandists along our border communities. Infomercials and programs utilizing various media platforms to dissuade border jumping, both in English and Spanish. Invoking of a mandatory quarantine of 14 days for both irregular and or regular travel when it is that they are intercepted. We have since embarked on a phased reopening with respect to the entry of Belizeans and residents, which has resulted in some increased incidences of infections from COVID-19. However, because of these controlled processes of entry, the risk of spreading are minimal, according to the Ministry of Health. Notwithstanding, today our biosecurity threat remains real from irregular migration across our land borders, as well as our seaports, from both Belizeans as well as non-nationals. I say this since irregular migration practices accounted for 35.4% or 17 of the 48 cases of COVID-19 reported in Belize. This could be accredited to the economic downturn in Belize, as well as the neighboring countries, resulting in migrants having to attempt to enter while some have entered irregularly across borders seeking employment and engaging in illegal fishing and the like. We as a nation pledge to continue the collaboration and efforts within the region and Central America to do all that we possibly can in an effort to stem the spread of this pandemic and to deter irregular crossing and border activity by adopting some of the recommended and best practices brought forth in this security conference. I thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, for those words. Major Samuels, are you ready now?
Okay, we're gonna test it now again.
Thank you.
Okay now? Okay. So I click on.
Do you see it?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Presentation, slideshow. See it now?
Do you see it?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Major Samuels, and I'm the National Coordinator, Immigration and Border Security of the Directorate of National Security. I have a presentation for you all about the borders of Suriname and some measures to reduce the spreading of the COVID-19 virus. You know that we have official checkpoints in Suriname that because the borders are closed now, so that people try to reach Suriname other ways. We have a lot of problem at the east and west border, and a lot of criminal activities also on the borders. We have now in Suriname Operation Drindresi Waktisiki. I am the commander of this operation, and I will tell you more about that. We have a lot of checkpoints now because a lot of people will try to reach Suriname illegal, and then you have the current situation, not good. On that today, is that will be my presentation. The first case of COVID-19 was on 11th of March 2020, and that was an important case from Netherlands. After that, we have an implementation of the National COVID-19 Management Team, and prevention measures were announced. The first one was proclamation of lockdown measures. We had a total lockdown in the beginning, and after that, a partial lockdown. We have also banned on social gatherings. Everything was stopped on that moment. One of the things that we also do was closing of all borders and airspace except for cargo flights and ships. We allowed repatriation flights of Surinamese nationals, outbound flights for nationals of foreign countries. We also put checkpoints, medical and security checkpoints on various roads and rivers to minimize the influx from neighboring countries. You know that we are between Guyana and France Guyana. In the south, we have Brazil. And at that time, we have a lot of COVID virus in that country. And the last one was closing of public transport, schools, markets, casinos, gyms, etc. You know that in Suriname, we have 5 official checkpoints. When the border were closed, all these checkpoints, the immigration was not working. What we do, only for outbound and inbound, we open the gates at the airport and at the checkpoints. You know, we have in Nikeri, we have Southern, we have our international airport, Adolf Pengal Airport. We have an airstrip at Sorgaho, Albina. That's a hot zone for us now in Marawena, and we have our Susetni Harbor in Paramaribo. In the east, we have the Marawena River. You see that the Marawena River is 680 kilometers long, and that is very long. We can't secure this river. That's why people cross the river the whole day. Last week, I was there, and I was for an inspection, and I saw how people cross the river. You know, a lot of people from France Guyana stay in Suriname, and people from Suriname stay in France Guyana, and they cross the river the whole day. In the west, we have the Quarantine River. That is at the border with Guyana, and that river is 712 kilometers. In the south, we have 3 mountains with Brazil, but people also cross the mountains to be in Suriname. In the north, we have the Atlantic Ocean. That is, people come from Brazil with schooners, and they come in the Suriname River, where they are checked. And after that, we send them to the harbor. You see, that is our land card, and it is very huge, and we cannot control everything. You see, people everywhere, they try to reach, and they don't think about the COVID-19 situation in Suriname. I also said to you that the border with France Guyana is very wide, and it is very difficult to secure. The borders were closed since 10 April for all traffic. But illegal border crossing is a big problem. We detain Brazilians, Haitians, French, and a lot of Surinamese citizens. We have combined patrols with the police, the military, the security forces, and the Coast Guard. But the big problem that we have in Albina is that people work and live on both sides of the border. That is the biggest problem we have there. They live in Suriname, but they work in France Guyana. And then they're gonna go to work. That's why they cross the river. At the borders, we have a lot of criminal activities. We have drugs and drugs-related criminality. We have a lot of trafficking in person. We have illegal migration, people that come to Suriname for a reason. We have illegal gold mining. You know that a lot of Brazilians come to Suriname to go into the interior. We have gold smuggling. We have weapon smuggling, and we have illegal transportation of goods. Then the government tried to fight against this sort of criminality, and then we began with the operation Drindresi Waktisiki. That is Surinamese, but in English we will say that we drink some medicine before we get sick. To keep the COVID-19 virus outside the borders of Suriname, the national operation Drindresi Waktisiki was started at 30th of April 2020. The first commander of the operation was the Major Babel, but 2 weeks ago, I take the lead, and I'm the new commander of this operation. In this operation, we have the health service, we have the national security, we have the military, we have the civil police, and we have the Coast Guard. All are working together in this operation. The operation is being commissioned by former President D.C. Bouterse and led by the COVID-19 Crisis Management Team. This operation will last until 9th of August and is a civil military operation in support of health service, in particular the medical mission, and involving traditional authorities. The Coast Guard is also involved in this operation. After identifying COVID-19 infection in Eastern Suriname, that is what I talk about at the border of France Guyana, the President announced on April 29, on the advice of the National Management Team COVID-19, a total lockdown for borders and borders rivers. Checkpoints have been deployed at strategic locations on land and water in the east, west, and south of Suriname. That was done to control all alternative routes so that personal movements can be traced. There are currently 20 checkpoints on land at the following locations. We have locations in West Suriname that are Coroni, Saramaka, and Boskamp. We have in South Suriname, we have in East Suriname, and we have at the eastern border. At the checkpoints, questions will be asked about the travel history of people, and where possible, the temperature will also be measured. A total lockdown also applies to the border rivers. It considers the quarantine that is at the border with Guyana, the Marowijne at the border at Albina with France Guyana. This means that no transfers may take place without permission from the COVID-19 management team. River patrols are being conducted by military personnel, police, and the Coast Guard. In the west of Suriname, patrols on the Nekeri River, Clarasluis, Southern, Bektak locations, Wakai, and Apura. Also in the east, river patrols are conducted at Langatabaka, Gakalaba, Stulmas Island, Lawatabiki, and Kumakapa. Travel is only permitted for essential services related to health, safety, and essential government service. The Operation Drindresi Waktisiki and associated measures and activities are only intended to prevent illegal movements and further spread of the coronavirus in Suriname. This virus is known to spread at lightning speed and cause fatalities in record time. That is our current situation now. Today we have the one death, and we are now at 26 people that died. We have 521 active cases now. In quarantine, we have 386. Recovered, we have 965. We have no positive cases, 1,510. And in the intensive care unit, we have 11. You see that it is now a challenge for us to check what to do with all the people that are now in a health problem. We know that COVID-19 is here to stay. There is no vaccine. That's why we have to cooperate with the neighboring countries, France, Guyana, Brazil, Guyana, to monitor and secure the borders. That's what we want to do. That is one of our challenges for the future. Strengthen the capabilities of intelligence and law enforcement agencies. You can talk about how will the police operate under the physical distance rules. You know, yesterday, a whole police checkpoint has to be in quarantine because 2 of them get the COVID-19 virus. We have to look about the social unrest and the political turmoil. And last but not least, the psychological strain leading to negative behavior. You know, in the East, people don't like the rules we are there because they tell us that they don't believe in it. That was in the beginning, but now when they see that people are dying from the COVID-19 virus, I think that they become more sensitive about this virus. I think that is an overview of what's happening now in Suriname. You see that our borders are very difficult to monitor and secure, but I think that we have to work together with our neighbor countries to fight against this virus. I thank you.
Thank you, Major Samuels, for that detailed overview of what's happening in Suriname. We will now move to our fifth presenter, who is Garfield Wong, Deputy Director, Customs and Border Control Services, Cayman Islands. Mr. Wong, having joined the Immigration Department in 1983, has worked in every section within the department. At that time, the Department of Immigration handled the borders, asylum seekers, visitors extension, and the issuing of right to citizenship, work permits, and permanent residency. In 2017, the government made the decision to strengthen the borders, and in doing so, combined the staff from Legacy Immigration and Legacy Customs in order to form the Cayman Islands Customs and Border Control, which came into effect on February 1st, 2018. Mr. Wong will speak on some of the immense impact of COVID-19 on migration and mobility between the islands and action taken by the authorities to prevent the spread of the virus. Mr. Wong?
Good afternoon all. With protocol having been set, many thanks for inviting us to this session. COVID-19 has created a global pandemic and caused many countries to close their borders to visitors in order to curb the spread, and the Cayman Islands was no different. The government decided to close the borders on March the 22nd in response to the possible importation of COVID-19 and in suppressing community spread. Strict policies were put in place from the government, which included a curfew and almost zero flights to the sister islands, except for flights carrying goods. On April the 4th, 2020, the Cayman Brac recorded its very first virus infection for COVID-19. And the Premier of the Cayman Islands, Mr. Alden McLaughlin, was very concerned as we were trying to prevent the virus spreading to Cayman Brac. And that was considered very important, a very, very important objective, given that there were many elderly people living there. Based on information from the Chief Medical Officer, directives were put in place and policies were issued for travel restriction to the sister islands. These restrictions included both aircrafts and sea vessels. In order to properly police this travel restriction to the Cayman Islands, the directive included that staff from the national airlines would be tasked with ensuring that those traveling there were either essential needs workers or people who lived and worked in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. That would include Caymanians, permanent residents, work permit holders, Customs and Border Control officers who were also stationed at the airport also assisted in identifying these people who they knew did not live or work in the sister islands. It should be noted that Customs and Border Control assisted in policing this directive, as we technically could not stop someone from traveling there who would want to go there. Cayman Brac and Little Cayman are technically considered districts of the Cayman Islands. Caymanians, permanent residents and work permit holders who returned during the pandemic were required to be tested and quarantined in a government-run facility, a hotel, for 14 days and retested again before being allowed to travel on to the sister islands. Our law mandates that vessels traveling from Grand Cayman to the Cayman Islands must have outbound clearance from Customs and Border Control. Therefore, officers at the docks were instructed, as per the travel restrictions, that vessels were not to be cleared to go to either destination. Further restrictions that were put in place to travel from Grand Cayman to Cayman Brac included testing and isolation for people who were either going to check on their homes or to funerals and so forth. Based on the success of the Cayman Islands suppressing the spread of COVID-19 in the sister islands, they were successful in the lifting of the curfew, which we had in place. We had a very, very strict curfew in place in all three islands. And on July the 19th, excuse me, on July the 19th, inter-island travel by aircraft and boats were authorized by Cabinet without any further need for quarantine. However, if you should travel outside the territorial water of 12 miles for any reason, you will be required to test and quarantine. As the Cayman Islands, excuse me, as the Cayman Islands has now tested some 4 to 5% of our population, the Cayman Islands has no one clear-cut COVID-19 infection since the end of April. We have no people with any symptoms whatsoever since mid-June. Since we have been able to test so many people, we have identified people with very low levels of the virus, and so in this regard, Cayman cannot be compared with our neighbors because we have screened so many people. Our last positive screen was over 2 weeks ago. We're presently COVID-free at this time, having tested 29,500 people, which represents about 45% of our population. We are planning a phased reopening of our borders starting September 1st. And that phased reopening will be running for a period of 4 weeks while we monitor the situation. Back over to you, Joycelyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wong, for those remarks. I'll now call on Dr. Clarence Henry, Program Officer, OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Dr. Clarence Henry is a development economist by training. Currently, he serves in the service of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission in the capacity of Senior Technical Officer, Regional Integration Specialist. His current portfolio at the OECS Commission focuses on the advancement of initiatives to strengthen the free movement of persons regime of the OECS, and the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union. Dr. Henry is of the strong belief that regional integration is a vehicle for social and economic progress among developing states. The OECS economic integration efforts, in his view, have delivered benefits to the member states, and those benefits will be optimized with a fully implemented economic union. Dr. Henry will speak to the socio and economic impact of COVID-19 on OECS countries, impact on key sectors, mobility of people and goods. Dr. Henry?
Thank you very much, Joyce, for this introduction. Good afternoon to colleague panelists. I want to start by saying and expressing our gratitude. Our Director General, Dr. Lucas Jose, is always willing to participate and engage in these kinds of events where we're able to share our own experience at the OECS and also contribute to influencing policy direction at the regional level. What is really important, I think, and I'm very happy that the last part of this brief bio speaks to what we can do at a regional level to address socioeconomic challenges, as we would rightfully accept that COVID-19 has presented not just a health pandemic and crisis for the world and specifically for our region, but also it has emerged into a significant economic as well as social crisis for us. Having said that though, COVID-19 has also demonstrated the true value of regional integration initiatives at both the CARICOM and the OECS level. And if I may refer to the panel with the Honorable Prime Ministers, the Right Honorable Keith Michel, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, as well as the Honorable Mia Motley, I was very much pleased to hear our leaders speak to the importance of the regional integration initiatives in helping to cope with COVID. And this afternoon, I wanna extend this discussion into the whole idea of the regional integration initiatives, particularly at the OECS level, and of course, CARICOM, in helping to put member states in a position where they can bounce back stronger. And so my focus will be primarily not on what has been, but more on how we move forward, how we, through regional integration initiatives, strengthen the resolve and build resilience of our member states in addressing the COVID health pandemic, but as well as the economic downfall and the need for economic restitution, if you like, of our member states. And so if I may speak briefly to the challenges that we've seen with COVID as it pertains to the economic and social challenges, I want to first start by highlighting that in the actual response of the member states to the COVID challenge, and you hear many of the heads of immigration this afternoon spoke of the need for the importance of border closure and how it had helped address the COVID pandemic challenge at the time. But in the very fact that we close our borders, we effectively created what one could say was an economic issue. It was an economic issue because many of the OECS economies are really tourism dependent. And if borders are closed and people cannot move, ultimately it means your tourism is shut down. And the significant impact that has had on our economies speak really to not just the decline in jobs. So for instance, if you look at St. Lucia, you move from roughly 12,000 persons in employment within the sector to 12,000 persons, for the most part, out of a job in the tourism sector. You talk about income loss, you talk about the significant decline in revenues for government in responding. So that was the economic reality that COVID presented. Now, we've been in this COVID challenge since March. We are now in July, and the reality facing member states in the OECS, by extension CARICOM, is the need to determine how do you coexist with the COVID challenge. And that is critical. So we're now talking about moving forward. So how do you reopen your borders safely? How do you reopen tourism safely so that at the end of the day, you are positioning your country to be able to minimize the economic impact, social impact of COVID, but also continuously strengthen your resilience to addressing the health impact that COVID has created. And we are very mindful now of what's happening in the United States with what appears to be a second wave of COVID, especially in the southern states of the United States of America. So I want to speak to the whole issue of our focus on reopening, but I want to emphasize particularly on some of the key initiatives that at this point in time we recognize that we need to advance and certainly ensure that as we advance those initiatives, that all the member states within the OECS benefit from. So as we seek to reopen borders, the whole question of paperless border processing comes to mind, and the whole issue of the adopting of a sort of online border processing procedure is a key thing for our member states. And it is certainly a key regional initiatives for us. So this is the first thing we're looking at. How do we support border officials in doing what they do efficiently, in processing passengers, tourists, and returning nationals into our space? In recognizing that as we do so, there is need for quick sharing of information about the passengers coming in. There is also the need to ensure that border officials are safeguarded and the passengers within the space are also safeguarded. And so the whole question of social distancing being critical. And so consequently, one of our significant initiatives at this point in time at the OECS Commission is to advance an online online passenger processing procedure, supporting the member states to do so. And we're hoping that we can unveil this project with the support of the CARICOM IMPACS so that our member states are better positioned. So that's the first thing that I want to point out. The second, of course, has to do, and it's linked with the first, our continuous effort to strengthen border management systems, because that's important. We recognize that that part of the security apparatus that that all member states have is in terms of how effective and robust is their border management systems. We recognize that at this point in time, as we advance and support member states with an online passenger processing procedure, that we also should look towards other elements of the border management systems that we think are critical to strengthening their resolve to the COVID challenge. Because again, as I said previously, there is a requirement to reopen. There is a requirement to reopen your borders and your tourism sector, but it means that you have some level of risk as people come in. So there's the balancing act of addressing the health crisis, but also of ensuring that you do not have significant continuous economic peril, if you like, in this challenge as we face it. So strengthening border management frameworks become a very critical aspect, equal to that of the support to online border passenger processing. A third element I wish to present here in this panel discussion is the whole issue of strengthening digital identification. I think one of the things that we have learned from COVID-19 as a society and as a region is that you cannot go wrong in strengthening efforts to digitalize your economy, digitalize your government services and your private sector operations. And certainly one other area that I think is of use is in terms of digital identification. And so one of the things we want to do is to ensure that we strengthen digital identification for our citizens within the OECS, particularly because one of our flagship regimes is that of free movement of persons. And we would continue advancing movement of persons within the COVID environment as governments move towards creating a bubble, which would include the CARICOM member states and the OECS member states. And as we seek to encourage persons to continue to travel regionally, there is the recognition that we have a system in place that allow persons to be easily identified as they move from one member territory within the OECS to the next, particularly as there's the likely need for persons to continue to access health services as they move, and the need for health information to be easily accessible as people move. Digital identification becomes critical. And so one of the projects that we have that we certainly advancing at the moment, and currently there is some work being done to determine an implementation plan for it, is the whole idea of an OECS identification system to be developed, where the central aspect of that will be digital identification. So, Justin, I wanted to raise those issues to speak to the future as to what we're trying to do at the OECS level. And those are the key issues that I thought at this point in time that I raise and present to the panel. With that, I want to yield back, and I'm hoping that we would get some interesting, important questions for us to elaborate on some of the issues that we've raised this afternoon. Thank you.
I'm sure we will, Dr. Henry, and thank you for your intervention, the presentation. We'll now move to our seventh and final panelist, Rana Kasifi, Head of Caribbean Protection Unit, UNHCR. Rana is a Lebanese Canadian with over 16 years of work experience with UNHCR, working in different locations in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. She was in the Middle East and North Africa region during the Iraq, Syria, and Libya and Mediterranean crisis, and also was deployed to Turkey and Colombia to assist in designing and advising on registration verification projects for the respective governments. Rana is currently the head of the Caribbean Protection Unit, managing and supporting the Caribbean from UNHCR's multi-country office in Washington. Rana will speak on the conventions that are available to assist persons in need of protection during a crisis such as COVID. Rana?
Thank you, Joycelyn, for this introduction. Good afternoon to the fellow panel members. I am conscious of the time, so although I had 3 minutes for this quick presentation, I will try to make it even a little bit shorter. This is, to say the least, an incredibly interesting and challenging period for all of the international agencies and even local agencies. For UNHCR, the United Nations Refugee Agency, we have been established since over 70 years now, and we have operated in multiple locations where there are limitations and challenges to our operations, be it due to war or security restrictions or to the terrain of the countries that we're working in. So we do have some experience in working under difficult circumstances, but COVID-19 has definitely and surely brought a completely new phase or face to our operations. And so at the start of COVID, and as we now enter our 5th month, we needed to focus first and foremost in reorganizing our standard operating procedures. We have offices in some of the countries in the Caribbean, and for the other islands of the Caribbean, we remotely manage those operations from our office in Washington. So for the offices that were present in the Caribbean, we have staff, we have partners, and we have our persons of concern. First and foremost, for UNHCR and any other organization is the need and the obligation to adhere to the government and the state's protocol. In this regard, all of the protocols announced by the governments, be it lockdown or quarantine or closing of offices, were adhered to by UNHCR staff. And so there was a lot of this kind of focus in terms of administrative. But more importantly is how do we continue to ensure our access to persons of concern? We focused heavily at the start of the pandemic in providing accurate and reliable information to our persons of concern. And we reiterated not only the government's national protocol, but also the regulations that were put in place by PAHO. And access to this kind of information also allowed us to support the government. And then thirdly, we moved into a phase of looking at our program criticality. So what are the activities that we're able to look at and continue doing remotely, and what are the activities that we have to temporarily suspend? In parallel to all of this, we continued to try to support the governments in ensuring that those who are most in need and those who are in need of international protection are provided with this kind of specific assistance. We all know that the Caribbean is both a region of destination, origin, and transit for migration. And with the recent crisis in Venezuela, we have over 150,000 Venezuelans in the region, both migrants, but also refugees. And so the language that we are using at the moment refers both to those who are migrants, but also those who are in need of international protection. And as Mr. Rufus mentioned, how do we ensure access and protection and services to these individuals regardless of their migratory status? So this continues to be something that is paramount and the cornerstone of UNHCR's work. And with regards to the convention, the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees and its 1967 protocol, which several states in the Caribbean are signatories to, remains the cornerstone of international conventions that those who are signatories to have to adhere to and remain responsible. So a pandemic doesn't change a government's responsibility towards these conventions. It just means that the standard operating procedures or the modalities in which we operate needs to be changed and restructured so that our work contains the virus and limits the infection for the safety not only of persons of concern, but their communities, the country as a whole, and the region as a whole. And I know that in the next hour, we're going to be talking a little bit more in specific about how UNHCR can support these governments to continue shedding the light on the needs of those who are in need of international protection. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rana, and I want to thank all of the panelists for their presentations this afternoon. Just some points to highlight. We heard about the procedures in place for stranded migrants, porous borders, organized network of smugglers. We also heard about the panelists spoke about the irregular crossings at land borders, also cooperation with neighboring countries, and the need to strengthen the capacities of intelligence and law enforcement officers. We also heard about the types of traveling restrictions that were implemented to slow the spread of the virus. And OECS gave an overview of the work of OECS to facilitate the free movement regime and the Rana from UNHCR spoke about the conventions of the ILS. This is an interactive panel. So panelists, you too can pose questions to the group. I will now call on my colleague Rufus to continue with the question and answer segment. And also please excuse Belize director. She had to leave due to an urgent matter that requires her attention. Thank you. Rufus?
Yeah, thank you, Joycelyn, and thank you, members of the panel. And as you indicated, we've heard quite a lot with regards to the issues that member states have been experiencing during this pandemic, and the way forward, especially what and with regards to ways in which, as a region or as a country, we can help each other or formulate policies or pursue initiatives that can assist in dealing with some of the issues or the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused. And my first question will go to the Chief Immigration Officer of Trinidad and Tobago, Charmaine. Can you please, subject to confirmation of reciprocity and based on subject-specific health criteria, the European Union developed an internal process and narrowed down their list of third countries considered as safe havens. These citizens of which, will be eligible to enter the Schengen area once the borders are reopened for non-essential travels. The decision was based on the following health criteria: situation and coronavirus response in that country, the ability to apply containment measures during travel, and whether or not that country has lifted travel restrictions towards the EU. Do you think that a similar initiative should be adopted by CARICOM member states to determine which country or countries would be safe to accept travelers from? Charmaine?
Thank you, Rufus, for that question. I know in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been discussing the reopening of the borders, and which has to be carefully managed. And yes, that is one model that is being examined in terms of opening the borders on a phased basis to allow persons from what we might consider safe countries to enter and then move on from there. It is an interesting model, but I think at the end, each country has to make a decision as to what is best for their country. And while in the region, we may consider, yes, the region is safe and we may very well start allowing persons to come in from within the region, we still have to look at where the threats are, measures in place to address those threats. Right now, there's a 14-day quarantine stipulation for anybody coming into the country. And therefore, consideration with anybody traveling has to be whether or not they can go into quarantine for 14 days before they can even start any of their business. So I think it's a good model, and that it is definitely something that we are looking into. And in that, because there's a multi-sectoral committee that is really looking at the reopening of the borders in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much for your answer. And also, this question is for ASP Leroy Joseph. In the context of severe economic recession and increasing challenges to maintain social cohesion, do you envisage regional governments providing greater support for proactive migration policies, for example, by pursuing greater humanitarian programs, working with regional and international agencies such as IMPACS, CAFA, CDMA, RSS, UNHCR, IOM, to formulate robust policies and procedures to deal with the crisis at hand?
Thank you very much for that question. To begin with, I always believe, from my perspective, in harmonization and standardization of policies throughout the region. The OECS know that I will champion the cause. And whenever you get countries coming together for a harmonized approach towards legislation, that will cut back on the economic costs You could procure in bulk as opposed to individual countries procuring for the borders or any other item within their member state. We spoke in the past, even Dr. Clarence mentioned single identifier, harmonious border management system, online ID card. And once you come together as a region and you take a single approach, this by itself will cut back on costs. We have a safer space in terms of security, sharing information through our border management system. The interoperability of our border management system is key to the survival of the region, and is key also to the free movement at CARICOM National and OECS National. I believe that harmonization, and for the way forward, we could use the COVID-19 episode as a teaching example or lesson learned from COVID, where we can come closer to each other as a space, share information, and cut back on costs. I believe it will be more effective if we move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. And this question is directed at Dr. Henry. And Dr. Henry, some CARICOM member states responded promptly to the COVID-19 pandemic by taking actions to restrict international and regional movements. However, the extent to which borders were sealed and immigration services disrupted in the past 3 months varied across the region. Do you think that as a region, we should have harmonized policies and protocols to deal with pandemics or crises such as COVID-19?
Certainly, Rufus, thanks for that question. I want to start my response by saying this. When it comes to regional integration, the question is not whether to sustain regional integration or not. It is really how best to use it. So because we recognize the value of it. Having said that, no process is a perfect process. And in the context of CARICOM and OECS, we are still working on the perfection of our integration movement. And we recognize that member states are sovereign states as well. And so there is an element of policy making at times that are likely to be nationalistic. Having said that, there is the recognition that if we do it together as a region, we would tend to do it better because we pool our resources and our ideas towards a common challenge. And I think COVID-19 represents a common challenge to us all. It means, therefore, harmonization, adopting a harmonious approach is critical. And what is important to note is that during the COVID-19 challenge, which continues as we all know, the heads of government of CARICOM, the OECS authority, were meeting very, very regularly for dialogues. And as it pertains to the reopening of the borders, so there may not have been a singular approach to the closure of borders, but very, very much so, you get the impression based on the discussion at the heads level, at the OECS authority level, that there is a desire to reopen borders safely through a more harmonious approach to it. And so there is a discussion among the OECS authority as well as CARICOM in terms of how best to reopen borders. And certainly at the OECS level, there is a discussion that is taken a much more significant aspect now as it pertains to what are the common protocols for the European borders. It's certainly not finalized, but the discussion continues, and we can only say that's an indication that we understand. Let's do it together rather than apart.
And thank you very much. This question will be directed to Mr. Wong with regards to the travelers coming from third world countries. Do you think that they should be sent to a mandatory quarantine, even though they are in possession of negative PCR test results, you indicated that the Cayman Island will be pursuing a phased approach reopening in September. So I know now the requirements have been imposed by several travelers as to what would be the requirements in terms of what traveling to a country. So do you believe that persons should be placed into mandatory quarantine regardless of the fact that they are in possession of a negative PCR test?
It's a very interesting question. I do believe people would need to be quarantined. The issue is I can go and get a test before traveling to a country which shows negative. And what I do between getting the test and boarding the flight a few days later is could expose me to the virus. Now, the Cayman Islands, our approach to this will be someone to take a test 3 days in advance of traveling here. And I see where we will be getting some what is referred to as bio buttons, which will monitor the temperature and so forth of the person wearing it. Apparently, our chief medical officer has been wearing one for the last month, testing this system out, and that appears to be the direction in what we are moving in at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. And this question will be for Major Samuels. In your presentation, you indicated that you had persons moving from all direction into your member states. And because of the magnitude and the size of your borders, it was somehow impossible to manage those persons or manage these borders. And can you tell me what systems you have in place for persons who may have been intercepted at your borders with regards to the testing, isolating, and tracing some of those persons upon being intercepted at the borders in terms of where they're coming from, what exposure, what risk they posed to your general population?
Thank you for that question. At the borders, we have people from the health service that also work together with the police. When people illegal cross the river, we capture them and we bring them to the health service. If they are positive, we put them in the hospital there in quarantine. And after that, we put them out of the country. But if they are negative, the same day, we put them out. You know that in the border, in the place where the people are coming in, we have also 2 hospitals. And the people are aware that when we get some illegal persons, and that is every day we get them, they go for a checkup. And after that, the health.
Mr. Samuel, are you there?
I think we lost him.
Okay, all right. And well, Ms. Hughes, I'll call upon you to continue with the questions to the panel. You're muted, Ms. Hughes.
I'm sorry. Yes, this question is from the virtual audience. Dr. Henry, regional integration has had a history of obstacles do you think COVID-19 will move states closer? That's for you, Clarence.
Thank you, Joyce. I want to respond with a smile because that I think is a demonstration of optimism. You know, we have been at this whole regional integration project from CARICOM to OECS since the 60s, and we're still at it. And I think we're still at it because we know it works. It's not working perfectly. It's not where we want it to be. But I think we are at it because we believe it is better we are in an integration arrangement that has not been optimized than being without an arrangement where we do not have each other to count on. Having said that, I think the optimism surrounding whether the COVID-19 environment has created or presented a new impetus for advancing regional integration can only be examined from the standpoint of what we've seen and how the current leaders within CARICOM and OECS have responded. And so let's take, for instance, the issue of travel. We now see how the leaders have found a way to address the LIAT issue. And a lot of the leaders are now talking about reducing the taxes to facilitate a much more efficient interregional travel system. I think that's a positive. We've now seen how the leaders have recognized the importance of CAFA, RSS, CARICOM IMPACS, in terms of building our response to the COVID challenge. So I say all of this just to point out that we have a unique opportunity today to make regional integration work and to ensure that it is much more efficient than it was prior to COVID-19. I think that's what COVID-19 has given us, and I remain optimistic. And I think, in the coming years, we should see some greater advancement in regional integration as a result of what is currently happening now.
Thank you, Clarence. And this question is for anyone on the panel. It's from the virtual audience. We are moving from one crisis, such as a transnational crime, to a pandemic. How can CARICOM states mitigate while adapting to the new normal? That's to anyone. Or should I reread?
Yes, yes, here it is.
Okay, we are moving from one crisis, such as transnational crime, to a pandemic. How can CARICOM states mitigate while adapting to the new normal?
Thanks. I don't believe we are moving out from the transnational criminality. We have to bear in mind, we have to work on the transnational criminality and the pandemic of COVID-19 simultaneously. One may recall via statistics that due to COVID-19 and the closure of the borders, there is a reduction in transnational crime. And the mere fact, because the borders are closed, criminals are fear in moving across borders. Probably might happen in areas like Guyana with the land borders. But in terms of the OECS, where geographically we are separated by water, therefore there is a reduction in criminality. Now, in terms of the COVID-19, we have to mitigate COVID-19 by employing all our possibilities we can in terms of shrinking our borders. Health Quarantine Act have to be enforced at this time, and other mitigating factors which will reduce the spread. Closing of our borders also is a mitigating factor. By closing our borders, pre-check, check and arrival, all you have to examine all those mitigating factors in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And at the same time, we have to be mindful of the fact transnational criminals will continue the criminal activities despite COVID-19. It would not deter them, it would not suffer deterrent, but in the same breath, law enforcement have to step up at this time and take all the opportunities, all the arms and ammunition, at their disposal to ensure that both the epidemic and transnational crime fight simultaneously. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Joycelyn, just so I can add to what ESP Joseph has said, and we have seen during the pandemic that criminals will try their best to find ways to continue the operation regardless of what the issues are at hand. And we have had instances where persons have reported, and especially law enforcement agencies have reported where persons now are moving their operations virtually using the cyber attacks or means of what and the illicit activities online. So we also saw where persons may continue their illicit operations with regards to the smuggling at sea of migrants or persons. We also have seen persons smuggling more contraband, and we know that our region, how porous it is, and we have instances where persons have reported that persons are moving from one state to the next, using and go fast vessels. So criminals will always tend to adapt, given at least whatever situation is at hand. It's a matter of what law enforcement agencies and law enforcement personnel working together, and not just in silos, but collaboratively in terms of sharing intelligence and information that can keep those criminals at bay and erode the illicit activities at whatever levels that we can. Because we know that crime, to some persons, they believe, well, hey, whatever situation that we're in, we will find a means of and pursuing our illicit activities and illicit gains. Back to you, Joycelyn.
Thank you, Rufus, for that intervention. Rana, I haven't forgotten you. There's a question from the virtual audience. Question for UNHCR representative. Notwithstanding the fact that CARICOM states are obligated to fulfill UN resolutions concerning refugees and migrants, how do countries balance this obligation with security, economic, and social issues that these refugees may pose? Rana?
Yes, thank you. I was actually typing out the answer. First of all, I want to thank that individual for a very valid question. Absolutely. Every sovereign state has the right to ensure safety for all of those individuals on its territory. And this is something that UNHCR tries to support governments in doing. The rights that are given to asylum seekers in need of international protection and the rights that they enjoy under the different legal instruments don't overrule their obligation to adhere to the national laws and also to respect the national customs and cultures. So they go hand in hand. It's both rights and obligations to these individuals. So in terms of supporting the government in ensuring security, there are different screening measures that can be put in place to ensure those individuals who are arriving to the territory are filtered so that those who are in need of international protection are counseled and screened, and then they are addressed through the necessary channels. In terms of economic and social issues, UNHCR is never in favor in creating any kind of dependency. And one of our main tasks and challenges, especially in this pandemic, is how do we ensure that individuals can be self-sufficient and self-reliant and contribute to their local community? A lot of times these individuals have a lot of expertise and skills that could benefit the labor market that they're in. And UNHCR's role is to see how we can match these individuals to contribute. Of course, within this group, there are individuals who are very vulnerable and will not be able to be self-sufficient and reliant. And this is where UNHCR and partners will try to provide services and assistance. But we are very much in favor of refugees to be active participants within their community, boost their local communities, economy, and the society that they live in. And this is the core objective in all of the activities that we design. So just to recap, in terms of security, there are screening measures that can help governments filter out those who are in need of international protection. And there are certain targeted activities that provide self-sufficiency and reliant, that allows individuals to be self-sufficient and reliant. And also these activities can target some of the individuals within the local host community so that they can also benefit. And this merges social cohesion between the two communities. I hope I answered sufficiently. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rana, for that. And I'll hand over to you now, Rufus. You are muted, Rufus.
And yes, this is for Clarence. And in your intervention, you spoke about the steps that are being pursued by the OECS Union with regards to assisting member states in and trying to adapt to the new normal. And you spoke about the digitalization of various systems and the implementation of various systems that can assist with the ease at which business is being conducted. And in terms of what bringing member states to a level where they can take advantage of the technology to enhance the operations and the ease at which business can be conducted. Can you just elaborate a little more on those initiatives that are being pursued on behalf of the OECS Union or OECS member states?
Thank you, Rufus, for this. So let me emphasize a bit on what we're trying to do. Prior to COVID, there was the recognition that we need to advance a system that will bring our economy and society closer. Because within an economic union, in truth and in fact, you should have seamless movement of persons, businesses, service providers, etc. We all know that's what an economic union or single market would require. And it's all about the systems to ensure that we do so. Now, what we're trying to do now is more or less advancing on what has been done in the past. So for instance, previously we had the e-grip, which focus on the digitalization or creating electronic systems to support efficient government services. We recognize that this is very critical because the whole need for efficient government services or efficient private sector services is not just nationalized, it's regionalized, because you want to create a situation where someone is able to move very quickly in terms of the use of their time, their resources and so forth, from one member state to a next. So essentially what's happening in the OECS now, you have the digital currency focus. That of course is not particularly championed by the OECS Commission, but certainly the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, which is an institution of the OECS. So you have as well what we are doing in terms of the OECS ID. The OECS ID, if I may elaborate, is a system that will build on the multi-purpose identification system of the past. The emphasis of that system, as I would have indicated previously, is to strengthen digital identification of individuals. But to be able to create a system that allows persons to be registered in a seamless way from birth to death. And that such system, registration system, allows for the interconnectivity of all other forms of registration as it pertains to that individual. So all other forms of ID. So you have your civil registration, but also you have your passport, your social security registration, your driver's license, all of that coming under one umbrella. So you have a much easier way of identifying individuals, not just within the national space, but as they move across the economic union space from other member states within the economic union space. The benefit of that allows for a much easier way of providing services to these individuals across the economic union space. It allows for much quicker identification of persons. And I think that is one of the areas that will strengthen our health, our response to health pandemic and crisis. Because if you're able to, in a heartbeat, obtain medical records of an individual, let's say a St. Lucian who is in Dominica at the moment, the Dominican health officials being able to identify and get the health record of that person which has been digitalized, so that they can treat that person in the manner that based on their own health history, then you have an advanced system. So this is what we're working on, strengthening the digital identification and also the digital economy of the OECS, so that we strengthen economic outcomes and our regional and global competitiveness as economies. And that's all about talking about moving post-COVID, strengthening resilience, because we're talking about COVID today and strengthening resilience against COVID and any economic downturn that we have seen. But we all know that COVID-19 is the crisis of 2020. We do not know what the crisis of 2021 would be and beyond. But if we do what we need to do now, we're strengthening the resolve. So digital identification, digital economy are what we're working on in that regard to strengthen our resilience.
Okay, thank you very much. And this question is directed to Charmaine. And Charmaine, you indicated in your presentation that you have seen instances where persons are now advertising on businesses where to illegally or transport persons from Venezuela into Trinidad. Can you tell us or enlighten us with regards to what systems do you have in place as the Border Security Agency to identify those persons when and if they are landed in Trinidad, and how that information is being shared among your law enforcement colleagues with regards to persons coming in, and if, for instance, and what mechanisms do you have in place to work with other sectors or other agencies, let's say like health, with regards to the testing of those persons to identify, test, and isolate those persons in the event that they may be tested positive for the COVID-19 virus?
Thank you, Rufus. That's a pretty loaded question. Let me take it in parts. In terms of identifying the persons and based on the information that we're getting, of course, there is a collaboration between all of the relevant arms of national security and the Ministry of Health to deal with this issue, so that all of the agencies are working together to address it. There are measures that they have put in place, the intelligence that we need to gather to identify when these persons may be coming, and then have the personnel on hand to either turn them around or to detain them if they arrive on land. Everybody who comes in, once we've detected any foreign national coming in, is put into quarantine. That is a requirement, and they are tested to see whether or not they pose a threat. So they have to go into mandatory quarantine. The Minister of National Security would have said as late as this morning on a morning talk show program that we are to detain and to repatriate as soon as is possible all of these persons who have entered the country illegally. That is in the interest of national security. So that has been taking place. We do work closely with the Ministry of Health, and at all ports of entry, you have port health officers who can be contacted, people who are on call 24/7 in order to do the necessary quarantining of any of these individuals. So there's a collaborative approach. There are intelligence agencies who are working on what we might be seeing on social media to get information, to send to the operations of the police, of the Coast Guard, so that we may intercept and deter any person seeking to gain entry. But like I said, once they arrive and once we pick them up, then they go into a quarantine facility and they are then repatriated to their home country. In most cases, it is Venezuelan nationals that we are seeing coming in, and they are returned to Venezuela.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Hughes?
Yes, thank you, Rufus. This question, before I go to the chat, the questions from the virtual audience, I'll ask Rana this question. Actually, it's a twofold. What measures has UNHCR put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic to continue its work while supporting the regional governments in containing the virus? And two, how can UNHCR support governments in screening persons in need of international protection during a pandemic?
Thank you. For the first part of the question, I kind of briefly mentioned in the previous answers about how UNHCR had to remodify our standard operating procedures. This really was the first of its kind where our staff needed to stay home as per the regulations of the government. Our persons of concern were advised to also stay home, and our partners as well. And so with a little bit of creativity and thanks to technology, a lot of our interactions with persons of concern became online. That, of course, brought a new set of challenges because, you know, how are you able to determine this person's identity and to confirm that they are who they say they are? And so we had different guidelines and policies that were put in place to have these interviews become online and to conduct them remotely, and especially for those most in need. Some of the countries provided telemedicine. Some of them provided protection interviews, registration. Our partners continued online. So there were different activities that were able to continue online. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, there were some activities that were temporarily suspended. In addition to that, we have provided to some of the governments in the region refugee housing units. These are actual physical structures that were donated by UNHCR to the respective governments and have been used as either medical facilities or quarantine facilities, especially in areas that are very remote or areas where the government does not have sufficient facilities for either to turn it into a clinic or a hospital or a medical facility or for quarantine purposes. So we have, aside from remodifying our standard operating procedures and communicating with our persons of concern, their obligation to adhere to the government's protocol, we have had to provide support to governments and also ensure that those who have any symptoms that could potentially be at risk of COVID are seek the medical assistance that they require. So that's with regards to the first question. With regards to the second question, as I mentioned, this pandemic adds actually another layer on individuals who are in need of international protection because of the closure of borders. And a lot of people have ended up, irrespective of their status, losing their jobs and having to rely on negative coping mechanisms. And that by default places these individuals, whether it's women, men, or children, at the risk of being trafficked or smuggled or exploited. So one of the key things that UNHCR has supported governments with is the screening process at the time of arrival to the territory. And at that point, and again, I want to kindly reiterate the need for our language to include migrants and refugees. It's not all of the individuals that come to the Caribbean are illegal migrants. There are individuals who are in need of international protection. And so screening of these individuals at the onset is crucial for determining their needs and then processing or adjudicating their cases, either according to the national asylum system for countries who are not signatories but have their own system, or in countries where they don't have their system and have requested UNHCR to adjudicate these cases, we would do that. But it's screening at the point of entry, seaports or airports, it's counseling, and then it's adjudicating these cases.
Thank you, Rana, for that. We'll go to a comment made by the audience. Fantastic discussions. I do agree that we need to develop a more comprehensive approach to mobility and movement across CARICOM. Tourism is a mainstay for many countries, and this pandemic has presented a need to diversify. In addition to developing innovative industries to feed our economies, we need to take this as an opportunity to develop inter-regional travel for leisure, not just work. Any comments on that? To the panel, open.
Joyce, if I should take the first attempt at this question, I think it's very important and very timely, especially as we hear a lot of the effort to save Liat, one of our trusted regional air carriers. I think it is important to understand that true regional integration starts and ends with how people are able to access the regional integration goods, which are regional integration public goods. Regional travel will be and has been the central piece or element that connects all of our member states within that region. And consequently, advancing a system that strengthens and leads to an efficient regional transportation network would be ideally what we would want to establish. So I think that is what you see at this point in time, the discussions surrounding strengthening and saving Liat, reducing taxes on air travel, examining the possibility of a fast ferry system, all connected towards advancing regional travel. And as I indicated, regional travel is the glue that brings our region together. So it's not just about the connecting the regional labor market, but it's all about reuniting families and friends. It's all about exploring our region, and the understanding that I should not just know about St. Lucia, but I should know about Trinidad too, because Trinidad is part of our region. And the same thing applies to knowing Guyana and knowing Jamaica and knowing all the others, and regional travel will allow that. So that is my piece on it. I'll give way to others to elaborate further.
Thank you, Clarence, for that. Any other comments? Well, they always say time flies when we're having fun. I notice now it's 3:30. I'll hand over now to Rufus if there are no further comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hughes. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the members of the panel for such an informative session. And we have learned quite a bit with regards to member states and response to the COVID-19 pandemic and ways in which we can pursue, certain initiatives that can enhance and that can assist in regaining some form of normalcy, as some of our governments are pursuing ways to relax some of the restrictions that they have imposed on travel and movements around the region. And once again, I would like to say a special thank you to CARICOM IMPACS, my colleagues, and for making this happen. And our virtual audience, I would like to say thank you very much for participating in this discussion. And once again, thanks to the panel, the panelists and persons who, based on the contribution that you guys made today, I must say that we are very pleased to take forward some of those recommendations that have been tabled, because we have seen great value in pursuing these recommendations, especially pursuing systems or applications and technologies that can assist with the migration and movement of persons, especially during the crisis. And I trust, at least for the recommendations that are being made or were made by, and especially what Clarence and his OCS and mindset and the initiative that they're pursuing would be also be something that we can take forward. And also we greatly appreciate the issue highlighted by Suriname with regards to how are they pursuing the issues that have been raised or they followed by the COVID-19 pandemic. We also be grateful for the insights provided by our Cayman Island colleagues in terms of how they will be pursuing their phased approach in opening back their country. And I trust that most member states have developed their policies or protocols to guide them into that process. And thanks to Trinidad for sharing their insights also with regards to what they're seeing, and especially where illegal migration is concerned. And I must say, thanks to the team, and God bless you.
Thank you. And also, please remember to join us tomorrow morning at 10 for a session on climate change and security building resilience in small island developing states. We'll have a keynote address by the Honorable Alan Chastanet, Prime Minister of St. Lucia, and also panelists from CDMA, CIMH, and CC5Cs and CADI. Also in the afternoon at 1:30, we have a session on crisis and gender-based violence. Thank you so much again, and have a great afternoon.